shared on other accounts, right? So one of the things that I tend to do is to go through my personal account, because I follow people on my personal account more aggressively than I do on my organizational account. I'll get back to the why in a second. And then often I will retweet things on the organizational account that are coming from my personal follower list. So it's just important. A couple of guidelines that we use at PAPS, which is my home organization, Prison Abolition Prisoner Support. We never use the word I on the organizational Twitter feed. We never share personal opinions on the organizational Twitter feed. Although my co-founder, more so she than I, Leah, if you're on, but you know, she tends to be aggressively a troll on her own personal account, but is always incredibly professional on our organizational account. So just remember that you're representing your org as a whole. So what I thought would be fun is to, I'm not 100% sure how to share my screen on Zoom, actually.
So you should have a button at the bottom of the screen, and I started recording just now, if that's okay.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool.
So
it'll be a green button that says share screen, and you should have permission to do it.
Great. So I'm gonna go ahead and just share my whole desktop. So what I kind of wanted to do was to just start by showing you a completely empty Twitter account. So this is a Twitter account that I started years and years ago that I just deleted. And I kind of want to talk through how you should start from the beginning. And I understand that some of you already are established. So for those of you that are, you know, I'll kind of stop you, or, you know, if you get bored, whatever, you can go ahead and, but what you want to make sure is that you want to set up your profile, right? So you see here that I just made one that's called OHPAPS. So this is going to be the Ohio version of the PAPS Twitter. And I'm going to go ahead and just make sure that it has a name, Ohio Chapter of Prison Abolition Prisoner Support. You want a bio. Now, what you put in your bio is sort of up to you. For individuals, a lot of people like to put their pronouns and what languages they tweet in. For organizations, I think that it's a good idea to include a couple of hashtags. So, you know, like if you're primarily tweeting as to Free Them All 614, then you would probably want that hashtag in there. But you do want to give people a sense of who you are and sort of why they're coming. So something like, we are a pen pals to prisoners and advocacy organization fighting to free them all, but especially free them all for public health, COVID-19 behind bars. And then maybe we would want to have something Ohio specific in terms of the hashtags, but whatever, right? And then we're going to put that the location is Ohio, and you want to include your website. If your organization has a date of birth, Twitter will do birthday stuff. I usually just leave that blank. Now, one thing, and I don't have an icon right now, but you do want to make sure that you have an icon. When you start following people, they're going to want to see who you are. And I think the biggest mistake that new eggs, which is kind of what you call a newbie on Twitter, make is that they don't change their avatar or their icon from the new egg icon. And then the first thing that they start doing is following people. And that's not what you want to do initially. You want to make sure that there are certain things on your Twitter feed that give people a sense of what it is that you are up to, okay? So like, for example, you'll notice on this account where my icon is that I'm following 25 people, but I have 21 people following me back, okay? Obviously, you're gonna start as zero when you first start out on your account. Now, the number of people who follow you compared to the number of people who you follow is your follower to followed ratio. That ratio is the single most important thing about your Twitter account in terms of people determining how influential you are. So what ends up happening is that people get on Twitter and the first thing that they start doing is that they follow 400 people. And what ends up happening is Twitter decides that you're a sick spot and they suspend your account. So you don't want to go that route. You want to make sure that the first people that you follow are people that are likely to follow you back. Now, if we were to go look, for example, at the PAPS Twitter real quick, one of the things that I'm really, really proud of is that we follow just shy of 700 people, but we're followed by almost 1,500. So our following to follower ratio is 1 to 2. That's great. You want to make sure that more people are following you than you are following. Now, that's hard to do in the beginning, right? Now, let me show you something else. When you're looking at my personal account, I follow 4,000 people, but I'm only followed by 1,300. So my personal ratio is way off, but I don't care about my personal ratio because I'm not here to monetize my Twitter feed. So what I was getting at earlier is that reporters, for example, are very rarely going to follow you back, but you might want to follow them in order to get a sense of what it is that they're reporting on. So if you have multiple Twitter accounts, you might want one where you're just following a bunch of people in order to get that on your list. But then make sure that your organizational account is only following people that are likely to follow you back, especially in the beginning. Another way that you can kind of avoid the follower to followed trap is Twitter allows you to make lists. And on lists, what you can do is add people's accounts or add accounts that are likely to discuss certain topics just for the purpose of then going to that tweet list and seeing those accounts. Some accounts won't allow you to add them to lists because it does mess with their follower to followed ratio. So your mileage may vary. The decision that I made early on, in part because I got on Twitter before lists happened, was to just follow anybody that I felt like it on my personal, but then to be very, very cautious about who we followed on our organizational account. The next mistake that I think people who start out on Twitter make is that they think that the first thing that they should do is to be following a bunch of people. And here's the problem. If you start out following a whole bunch of people, but you're not creating any content, then, you know, if you have all the right hashtags in your account, but you follow us on PAPS, we're not going to follow you back because you're not providing any content, right? So if you come on and your name is Free Them All and you have no followers, and you're following 200 people and you don't have a single tweet, it's not worth it to me to mess up my ratio to follow you back. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that before you start following anybody, you have content. Now, if you're talking about your personal Twitter feed, what that content looks like is going to kind of be up to you. It might be, here's a picture of my dog. This is what I ate today. So for those of you who have a personal account that you're trying to leverage towards doing prison work, the best thing to do is to tweet, like, I don't follow this rule, but this is what the social media experts say. You want 6 tweets a day, 3 of them being personal and 3 of them being related to your cause. And that way people sort of get to know you as a person, but they also understand that you're associated with your cause, right? And one thing that you can do to make this easier on yourself is to use TwitterDeck. So what TweetDeck will do is it lets you schedule tweets well in advance, right? So let's say that you have a press release that you're trying to make sure is on Twitter, or you're doing fundraising and you want to make sure that your fundraising link is going out, then you can schedule the tweet to go out multiple times a day. Now, this can get a little tricky. You do, in certain cases, if you're sending out, a press release or you're sending out a call to action, you may want to tweet it multiple times, but you don't want to tweet it so often that people decide that your account is only tweeting one thing, and then they get bored and they unfollow you or they mute you, okay? But TweetDeck can be really, really great for scheduling things. So for example, like Free Them All 614 is a Twitter account that I've actually thought was really good for the person that's on from that campaign. But one thing that I would like to see them do is, if you're having people call between noon and 2, go ahead and schedule a tweet to go out at 11:30, reminding people, hey, here's our script. This is the call that we need you to make in the next 2 hours. And then go ahead and just schedule 4 or 5 tweets to go out within that 2-hour period, or maybe 5 is too much. It kind of depends on your follower list, but make sure that you are scheduling tweets around the time that it is that you want somebody to go out. Now, some of you might say, okay, I'm brand new to Twitter, or maybe, like with Epic, you are in a situation where you've had a Twitter account for a while, but you don't necessarily feel like you have a lot of content that you can be sharing. Another thing that you can do that's really helpful, this isn't a Twitter thing, it's a general thing, but it works well, is in Google, you can create a news alert. So when you create a Google alert, what it does is to say, you can create an alert about. So let's say that I'm tweeting as ensuring parole for incarcerated citizens, Epic, and I want to know when parole is, any news item having to do with parole. I enter in my email, I create the alert. Now, any news item that comes including the word parole is going to come to my email. And you can set up options like, I want it to only come as the best results. I only want it to come once a day, or at most once a day, however you put it. But the idea is that now you have a whole bunch of news items that are coming to your email. And then you can turn around and use TweetDeck to schedule those news items going out on your Twitter for the next day or 2, in order to make sure that your account has content. And I personally would suggest that anybody who's brand new to Twitter, whether it's a personal account or an organizational account, begin by just establishing their Twitter presence for a few days before they start following anybody. And like, let's say that you tweet with us, go ahead and tell us that you're starting your account so that we can follow you before you really start following anybody else. Because if you have someone who has, 2 people that they're following and 10 people are following them, then other accounts are going to look at that and say, wow, that's a little odd. Because the point is, you want to make sure that when you follow an account, that account follows you back, so that you can keep this ratio strong so that other people take you seriously. And I think a major mistake that organizational accounts make, especially in the beginning, is to kind of follow everybody back. And you don't want to do that, because you don't want to mess with your ratio. Now, if it's somebody who's an organizer with your campaign and you want to make sure that you're seeing their tweets, that's fine. But if you have people who are just posting pictures of their cats, there's no point to having them on your list when you're seeing them, because that's just going to sort of slow you down, right? So, any questions so far?
No, this is very insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, the news alert thing is blowing me away. that's a great way to search for things that,
Well, it's not
we
even a
might
search.
miss.
They're just going to come into your email box, right? And so what you can do is you can set up a filter and have all of those news alerts go into a folder so they're not
Cram up everything. Yeah.
cramming up everything. But then you can say to somebody who says, okay, I'm new to Twitter, but I want to help the org. You can say, great, your job is to go through the news alerts and turn those alerts into tweets. And there are some more sophisticated ways that you can set up news alerts so that they automatically turn into tweets. That's a longer conversation, but for right now, I would say don't do it, just because you don't want to be in a situation where the news alerts capture things that you don't agree with, right? So I'm just going to stick with Epic well, actually, let me switch to using somebody else as an example. Who have I sort of not picked on? Let's say that, I'm tweeting as the Ohio Student Organizing Committee, and I put Ohio Student as an alert. There may be certain news items that don't fit our message. You don't necessarily want to turn the news alert into an automatic tweet. You also don't want to be in a situation where it's being really repetitive because the same article ran on 8 different news outlets, right? So it is time
so
consuming.
accurate. Yeah,
Pardon?
I get the news alerts for Ohio Student Association, and yeah, both of those things are very accurate. We get a lot for like student associations, like the Muslim Student Association or like Asian Student Association at different universities, and then also like the same article. So yeah, definitely wouldn't work for us.
But this is one of those things where if you have somebody who says, I want to help the Twitter account, but I'm scared to do anything wrong, then you can just say, okay, your job is to take the news alerts and schedule them into TweetDeck.
And maybe this could be a conversation for later that like I can have with you, because I have some Google alerts for like Cuyahoga County Jail, Cleveland protests, and things like that. And I often come across some articles that I don't necessarily know how to turn into tweets without just repeating what the description is, like the subheading of the headline.
So actually, can I go ahead and answer that
question?
question? I think that's a really great question. So let me brag for a second, right? I've been doing some news in Cleveland. So I'm just going to Google for my name in Cleveland, right? And you're going to see that the top hit is inmate families want judicial release fast tracked. Now, we don't use the word inmate on our Twitter. That's just one of those policies that we have. We use person first language. But one of the things that you can do is when you go to the account, when you click on the Twitter icon, it's going to take you to their pre-made tweet, right? Now, we don't like this because it says inmate families, right? So we're going to change this to families of incarcerated people want judicial release fast tracked. But at least this gets you started on your Twitter or on your tweet, excuse me. The next thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is how hashtags work. And this is really related to the conversation. Now, you as people who are new on Twitter should not be trying to establish your own hashtag because you don't have the following, okay? So if I decide that I want a hashtag about how prisoners are people, I can't just say, well, I want prisoners are people as my hashtag. If I have a new account with a new egg icon and 4 followers, because nobody is going to pick up my hashtag, right? So one of the things that you need to have a good understanding of is what are the hashtags that other people are already using and how can you piggyback off those hashtags? So I would say a third of the time that I am tweeting a news item about Ohio, even if it's not necessarily Columbus specific, Free Them All 614 has done such a good job of trending their hashtag that if I have enough characters in the tweet, I go ahead and throw in an extra Free Them All 614, even if it's actually a count about Cleveland. Now, I'm not gonna do that if it's a tweet about a riot in Indiana, right? Because that's kind of veering too far off their hashtag. But we have definitely picked up, I would say, 10 or 15 Twitter followers off PAPS just from the people who are following the Free Them All 614 hashtag. So right now, the hashtags that are hot is FAM, which is a family organization, started the hashtag I care for. So I care, the number 4. And what they wanted people to do was post pictures and stories about people that are incarcerated that they care for to humanize people. And one of the things that PAPS did, that Leah did, was to go through and create a YouTube video that is just all of the tweets from that hashtag set to music. And it was just incredibly powerful. So I tend to, if the
That's
story
awesome.
is about like individually incarcerated people, I throw in an I care for. And what ended up happening was, like, on the tweet that we first sent out about this particular news article, throwing in the I care for hashtag got the people who organized that hashtag to retweet this article by actually going into it and pulling the part at the end where I said, you know, there's someone's brother, there's someone's, I can't remember where it was, but they pulled a line that was, you know, particularly important about incarcerated people being people, and they turned that into their tweet with the I care for hashtag. Their tweet of that news article got way more retweets than my tweets of my own news article, because their account is so much bigger than my account. But why did they even see it? Because I've been consistently piggybacking on their hashtag. So if you get one thing out of this training, please, it's, unless your account has more than 1,000 people, don't think that you're going to be able to start your own hashtag, right? When I ask people, what hashtag are you using for the campaign? The answer should be, these are the hashtags that we've seen that are big. Now, exceptions to that are, let's say that you're organizing a rally and you're trying to get people to tweet out of that rally, because you're going to have a bunch of people at the event and you're going to have multiple accounts tweeting across that hashtag, and some of those accounts are going to be more influential than yours. It is totally acceptable. Like, for example, with the rally that's happening on Friday, to say we're going to tweet with this specific hashtag. Because if you have every single person at that rally tweeting with that hashtag, it's going to trend anyway. But you, as a small account, should not be trying to establish a hashtag. So right now, what are some of the big hashtags? I personally really like COVID-19 behind bars. That's one that's been used a lot. Free Them All for public health has been a big one. And then, like I said earlier, the Free Them All 614 has done a really great job of trending that. So I've been every once in a while tweeting stuff that's specific to Cleveland as Free Them All 216. I don't think that there's a whole lot of other people that are doing that. But because the 614 hashtag is trending sufficiently, having that variation on the theme is important. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't come up with your own hashtag. It's just that if you're going to come up with your own hashtag, you need to make sure that you have a plan for how you're going to trend that hashtag, which leads me to my next point. Actually, any more questions on that before I move on?
Yeah, do you have a link to, so it's hashtag I care for number 4? Is there a link to that YouTube video? I'd love to see that.
Paps Colorado, I see that you're on the line. Do you have a link to that video?
They're gonna put
I
it
think
in
they're
the
putting
chat.
it in the chat. Oh, jinx.
Okay, sweet. So, but that was a really good use of a hashtag, right? Because as multiple people started using it, and then that kind of gets to the idea that you can follow hashtags on Twitter. You can set up alerts for hashtags. But, you know, you can either do it, the easiest way to do it is to just search Twitter and say, I care for, right? And then the idea is that at any time, if somebody has used the hashtag, you can just click on it and it's going to take you to the tweets for that hashtag. And notice here that you have top, latest, and people, and then photos and videos, right? So if we're trying to find a video that was made with that hashtag, and it looks like, you know, so this is FAM Foundation. They're the ones that started it, right? This is a good way if you're specifically looking for video content, photos. But here's what I want you to notice. People, this is going to be people who have either used this hashtag a lot or have it in their name or have it in their bio. Okay? But here's what I want to show you. That top tweets, when you're searching for a hashtag, is going to give you the tweets that have the most retweets and the most likes. But if you're trying to grow your Twitter, one way to grow your Twitter is if you're one of the first people to retweet something, then people are like, oh, I want to follow that Twitter account because it's curating things for me. And the best way to do that is to look at latest, because that's going to give you the newest tweet on the I Care For, right? So when I'm seeing that Karen Omri, she's an anti-death penalty activist who tweets really aggressively. She's saying, I care for Jeremy Busby. She's trying to trend, this particularly wrongfully convicted person. You know, if I'm one of the first people to retweet that, then that can kind of help to increase people following me. One thing that I want to point out is that people talk about trending a hashtag a lot. You do not trend a hashtag by retweeting a tweet that is in it. So anytime that you're trying to do a Twitter storm should always include a list of tweets that you want people to tweet out that include the hashtags that you want them to use. But you should be very clear that people need to copy and paste those tweets into their own tweets versus retweeting. Because Twitter doesn't, the way that they track analytics is on the number of unique uses of that hashtag. So it's much better if I can get 10 people to send out one tweet with that hashtag versus if I have one tweet that gets retweeted 10 times. Which kind of leads me to the next conversation, which is, what is the use of tweeting from a lot of different accounts, right? So let's say that you're part of Cuyahoga County Jail Coalition and you notice that Free Them All 614 is trending a lot. And you're like, but we already have a Cuyahoga County thing. Well, one reason to create a Free Them All 216 would be to then have Twitter accounts talking to each other. Now that might seem like a mental health crisis, but there are times where I am having a conversation with myself on Twitter by using the Twitter app to go back and forth through accounts, right? So because we have the rule that I'm not going to use like earlier this morning, somebody was talking, or might have been a couple days ago, but somebody was talking about health conditions at Marion Correctional. And I wanted to tweet about how long it took my husband to get surgery for his leg. I'm not going to tweet that as Paps because Paps doesn't have a husband, right? So I switched to my personal account, but then the Paps account replied to my personal account. Let's be clear. This is me talking to myself on my phone, but the person who's reading through that chat on Twitter is not going to have a clue that that's me talking to myself. Right. So one of the things that you can do is if you have multiple organizations that are all working on sort of the same issues, you can go through and be retweeting each other's tweets and be interacting with each other. And as long as you kind of have a slightly different style to each of the accounts, it's going to be less obvious that it's just one person who's talking to themselves. And that's a good way to sort of just build your presence.
So how many hashtags are too many in a tweet?
That is a really good question. Well, Twitter used to block at 140 characters. It's now 280. For those of us that are old school, we tend to overwhelmingly still only send tweets that are under 140 characters just because we got used to it. I think it depends on the tweet, but I usually tend to go with no more than 3
Yeah,
in
'cause
any
I
individual tweet.
Yeah, I hate looking at just tweets that have like 20 hashtags in it. It's like
Yeah, no.
you kind of scroll right past it. It loses its a
Well, and I think it's
effectiveness.
also a ratio issue. You know, like if you're trying to say, I care for people behind bars who are impacted by COVID-19 behind bars, it kind of depends, right? Like if you have enough content, maybe you can handle 4. But if especially a lot of the things that you're claiming are a hashtag, if somebody then clicks on that hashtag, there's only 3 tweets, then why?
Hmm.
You could have just not had that as a hashtag and saved yourself that individual character. That's going to make you look stupid. Something else that a lot of people do, which drives me insane, okay? Let's say that you're sending out a tweet. Notice here that because I was looking at the I care for hashtag, Twitter is automatically going to include that in my tweet, right? Similarly, if I'm looking at Karen's account, if I click to tweet, it's going to automatically include her name. Something that a lot of, 2 mistakes that Twitter newbies make that drive me insane. One is if you tweet at Karen and you don't put anything before the @ in her name, people won't see that tweet unless they go to your tweets and replies. If you want everybody to be able to see the tweet that you're sending to Karen, then you need to make sure that you put something in front of that, which is why sometimes you will see a tweet that just has a period before somebody's @. And if you've been curious about as to why, that's the least number of characters that you can use in order to make sure that somebody can see it. And the analytics on that kind of change. You can sometimes still see tweets that begin with the @ without going to the tweets and replies if it's somebody that you follow extensively. One change that Twitter made in terms of the usability that I personally don't like, it used to be that tweets would always come in by the latest tweet, right? And that you really only see the things that have been tweeted in the last like hour or so. Now at the very top, I don't know if you can see this, but there's when you're using the app, it gives you the option of going back and forth between home, which is top tweets first, and then latest, which is the tweet, which is the traditional view of Twitter. And I personally like the latest one better because the point is I want to see what's new so that I can amplify what's new. If all my account is doing is retweeting the tweets that everybody else who's following the same hashtags I am has already seen, then nobody's going to follow me if I'm not showing anything that's new and interesting and curated, right? But let me get back to a personal pet peeve, right? Let's say that I am trying to get a bunch of people to look at my article. The wrong way to do this is to sit here and include 200 @. Because then what people will do is they'll just retweet it. And if for some reason you don't want to retweet this tweet, you're going to get a whole bunch of notifications every time that somebody likes or retweets this just because your name was in the @. Also, it just looks messy, right? Because you've got 15 people's names in the tweet and there's only 280 characters. The better way to do it is you make the tweet look exactly like you want it to, and then you reply to that tweet with everybody's name and some sort of like finger up icon and say something like, please RT. Now, if somebody includes you in that chain, please go back up to the tweet that they're asking you to retweet and then retweet that. Don't retweet the tweet with the names in it. But the more laborious, right? It's going to be more work, but it's the more polite thing to do is instead of just putting a tweet that has a whole bunch of people's names in it, pointing them to a tweet, you can send them a direct message. Okay. So we haven't talked about direct messages yet, but tweets anybody can see unless your account is protected or blocked. There's no reason for you to have a protected or blocked account for an organization ever. Some people like to have protected or blocked, protected. Blocked means that you've been removed. Some people like to have protected accounts for their personal. I'm personally of the point of view that if you're putting something on the internet, a cop is reading it, whether it's a secret Facebook group or whatever. So I would just say, don't bother to have a protected Twitter account. That's my personal opinion. Your mileage may vary. But you want people to be able to see those tweets. But the other thing that you can do is to send somebody a private message, right? Or in Twitter, we call them DMs, direct messages. So direct messages are private conversations between you and other people on Twitter. This is where the leveraging Twitter to get media attention can be very, very effective. So this article right here and its follow-up happened because I was going through Twitter looking for any journalist in the Cleveland area that had opened DMs. What does open DMs mean? Usually you can only send somebody a direct message if they follow you, right? Or you follow them back. No. If they follow you, then you can send them a DM. If you follow them, it's only if they follow you that you can send it. If you don't have the proper follower to followed relationship, but you send a DM, it does allow for them to respond to that DM. But one of the settings that you can change in your Twitter account is to make direct messages open. And I absolutely suggest that for every single organizational account. You can always just ignore them or block those people if what they're sending you in DMs is inappropriate. So what I had noticed about, so I was just going through and I think I just tweeted, or I just put in the search Cleveland News. And I was going through their bios and I noticed that Scott Knoll is Cleveland and News and he had open DMs. So I followed him on the PAPS account and then I sent him a direct message in which I said, hi, my name's Azura Crispino. I did it from the PAPS account. I'm with Prison Abolition Prisoner Support. My husband is at Marion Correctional. I am interested in talking about judicial releases and how to help decarcerate in order to stop the spread of COVID. Are you interested in covering a piece? And a few days later, he messaged me back and said, I've spoken to my editor. Can you do a Zoom call? I think it was the next day. Now, what ended up happening was, in his particular case, I think reading between the lines of the conversation, since this is a public thing that's going to be recorded later, I kind of get the sense that he was more interested in covering the story than his editor was. So if I had sent a press release as an email to his editor, it would have never ended up on his desk. But because I sent him an interesting DM and followed him, then he followed our account back, which meant that he started seeing more of the things that we were talking about in terms of prison reform. I mean, he's referring to me as a reformer. For the record, I'm an abolitionist, but whatever. He's not going to move the Overton window to that extent on mainstream media, and that's fine. Oh, for those of you who aren't aware, the Overton window is like the acceptable conversation that you can have on the news, right? So calling me a prison reformer is acceptable in mainstream media. Using the word abolition, right? That's like a little too far for them. So you won't see me listed as PAPS on their news item. Anyway, let's keep going. So the idea was, because I messaged him privately and I got him interested in the story, then he went back to his editor and argued for the story. And then afterwards, he told me, look, it's going to be easier for me to convince my editor to do more of these kinds of stories if you can get a lot of views on this particular video and on this particular article. So that's when I started aggressively privately messaging people that link and asking them to view it and share it on their own accounts. And then sure enough, yesterday he decided that he wanted to do a follow-up. But that began with me just going through and saying, okay, who's doing a news coverage in Cleveland? And just aggressively sending those direct messages. And it's a little bit like online dating. Not everybody is going to respond to your message, but you want to make sure that you're sending enough of them that somebody bites eventually, right? So you don't want to do this once. You want to do this repeatedly. But sometimes sending a DM to a journalist is more effective than getting press coverage than actually sending out a press release. And you definitely want to make sure that when you send out a press release, you have a good sense of who has a Twitter account so that you can send them a follow-up tweet. And especially if you can do it as a direct message, sometimes that can be more effective. So, with Democracy Now!, I had been on their show once before in 2016, and we have been following and retweeting them pretty aggressively. And then during Hurricane Harvey, we helped them get connected with the wife of a person who was impacted by the hurricane in prison. So they followed us back on that. But I hadn't sent them a direct message, since 2018. And today I just kind of got a wild hair up my ass. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to DM Democracy Now! Since Marion is on CNN and see if they bite. And they came back and said, okay, what's the best contact number for you? Let's see about possibly having you on next week. But then one of their people texted me within the hour and asked if we could do a preliminary appointment to discuss the possibility of an interview for tomorrow morning. So it's not a sure thing yet, but if I can land an interview on Democracy Now!, that's going to be really huge in terms of getting, favorable national news on our local situation.
Can you go back, Azari, and where can we find if somebody has open DMs?
Sure. So what
I
you're
had
going to do
connection
is,
problems.
no problem. So what you're going to do is when you go to search for people or groups, let's say that I'm trying to find someone who is, oh, excuse me, I'm in the wrong screen. My bad. Sorry. That would be my DMs. So search Twitter. I'm just going to look for Columbus News. Now, there's not, as far as I know anyway, a filter to see whether people have open DMs. Okay. But I'm just going to click on this person. I see that they have this little blue checkbox. So the blue checkbox usually means that they've at least gone through the trouble of getting the blue check mark. So that means that, you're really this person. This person is not a news anchor, so that doesn't help me. So I'm just going to have to keep going, right? Okay, this person is a resident scholar, but if they had open DMs right here, there would be the little DM icon. They don't.
Okay.
So, like I said, this is a labor of love. You really do have to go through, right? But so let's see, this person, you can kind of tell from her icon that she looks like a news anchor, right? So news gal, but she does not have open DMs. So that doesn't help us. So you just kind of have to keep scrolling. Now, this guy is a good candidate because he has these letters following his name. That's kind of a good indication that he might be a reporter. but you still have to actually go to I think if they have open DMs, sometimes, no, okay. So now this person has open DMs because I see that icon.
Oh, okay.
And I see that she reports on health for WOSU News. Right? So if I'm going to message her as a direct message, it would be a really, and I apologize, I usually do this on my phone, so I'm not quite
It's okay.
as used to doing it on my computer. Oh, it's start a new message. I might say something like, hi, are you interested in expanding your coverage of COVID-19 to people who are behind bars? Franklin County Jail has done an excellent job of decarcerating, but many people in Columbus have family who are in prison and are worried about their loved ones. I can provide you with incarcerated people, family, and advocates to interview if you are interested. Something like that. And then you hit send. Now, most likely she's going to ignore you, but if you message 10 people directly, then maybe one of them will come back to you and say, yes, I am interested in that story. It does help if you go through and notice, like, this person has 2,400 inmates in Ohio's prisons have tested positive for COVID-19 as their pinned tweet, and it's their story. Right? So I don't want to send her a generic message. I want to bother to listen, to go through the entire cycle, right? And I noticed that she's already got several incarcerated people in this article. So if I'm going to pitch her, I need to make sure that I have something really specific that I can offer her that she doesn't already have in her coverage. Whereas,
that's one that Epic helped with.
awesome, good job.
It's one that's just when you brought it up.
Well, I mean, I was just going randomly through, right? So if she's already an ally and I notice that she's already got coverage, then maybe this is somebody that I just want to follow and I don't necessarily want to send DMs to. Because if she's already connected with somebody in our coalition, then what's the point of us like fighting against each other? It makes more sense at that point for us to be working together. And like, look, this is less of a Twitter thing and more of a how to get media coverage thing, but you have to build relationships with journalists and you have to do their legwork. And let me explain why. ODRC has a press person, right? Or for those of you who are doing jail work, but whoever, they have their press people. And those press people are going to give them a press release and they're going to answer their questions. And the state is going to put the state's version of the events on a silver platter and hand it to the journalists, where all they have to do is run spell check and print it. If you want their coverage to be good, like Page's was, and make sure that it actually includes incarcerated voices, then you are going to have to do the dirty work of connecting them with those people. And that takes a network, right? So like I cold pitched Jeremy somebody or another at cleveland.com through DMs. He came back and said he was interested and that he specifically wanted to interview at least one person who was, or I can't remember what all of his requirements were, but they were pretty specific. I don't have that kind of hidden reach in Ohio DRC. So that's when I reached out to Epic and said, hey, I know that your list of people that you support in Ohio is longer than mine. this journalist is requiring people who meet these criteria to talk to them. And then it was my coalition partner who actually did the hard work of reaching out to those people and getting them to message back. But sometimes I'll get journalists who say, Azura, I'm doing a piece on trans women of color and their experience in prison. Do you have any trans women of color that you can put me in touch with? And it's like, okay, maybe I do, maybe I don't, but somebody in my coalition does, right? And the idea is that if you get good at giving journalists the leads that they want, then they're going to return to you. So for example, at the moment, I have a pretty good relationship with Javid Camille over at the LA Times, and I may have butchered his name. I apologize about that. So he was doing a story on prisoners in Arizona. I have one person that I support in Arizona, and it's in BOP. He wanted state prisoners. But we follow several organizations that are really strong out of Arizona. So I messaged them and I said, hey, this reporter, for a major national outlet is looking for people to interview. Can you follow up with them? And because I provided him with those sources, the next time he's covering a prison story, who's he going to come to? He's going to come to me because he knows that I'm going to put it on a silver platter and make it easier for him to do that coverage. So half the time, once you hook that reporter, right, assuming that that's why you're trying to leverage Twitter, then you have to make sure that you're giving them the information that they want, whether it's voices currently incarcerated in a certain unit or advocates or family members. And some of those asks get very specific, right? Like we're about to go into Ramadan. You might have a Muslim outlet that wants to do a story on how COVID-19 is impacting Ramadan celebrations, who wants to include an incarcerated voice. And you might get somebody who says, I want to speak to somebody who is in an Ohio prison right now and is Muslim and actually is holding Ramadan. Can you hook me up with somebody like that? And the answer might be, okay. I mean, and in that particular case, I actually do have somebody that I could refer them to, but it's not, my friend is at OSP. He's not really getting hit by COVID-19. So that's a situation where I might then reach out to Epic and say, hi, do you have somebody who's at Franklin or Marion or Pickaway who is about to hold Ramadan that might be willing to talk to press? Right? And that's kind of what it means to be in coalition, is to make sure that you're connected with the partners that are going to make it easy for you to then be able to give that information to the journalists. And I'll be honest with you, that takes time. Like, I have been pretty aggressively building a media relationship with Marsha Brown. Now, she's turned out to be really, really nice. But the way that I met her was that I was just kind of cold following random people on Twitter from the PAPS account that said that they were in Ohio. And I ended up following Lynn Tremonte, and she was incredibly useful. She's the one who connected me to both Rachel and Chastity. And then from there, that's why, at least for those of you who aren't with Epic, I'm connected with the rest of you. But Lynn's immediate response was to say, hey, I know this reporter with the American Prospect, let me give you her number. And I've probably spent about 3 hours on the phone with Marsha in the last 3 weeks. But because of how aggressively I've been giving her information, she just pitched a piece to the Appeal and convinced them to run it that is, basically all interviews from people that I provided her with. Nice. But that takes time.
You're a rock star, girl. That's all I have to say.
Well, thank you. I mean, please understand, I've been doing this for a really long time, and being the point person for media on a nationwide prisoner strike in 2016, right? I did 100 interviews in 2 months. So by the time that that was done, I pretty much feel like I got about 2 years worth of media experience. And let me tell you how effective cold messaging people on Twitter can be. So during the 2016 strike, we were getting really pissed off that the New York Times wasn't covering us. And I just decided to go through and do a search for NYT on Twitter. And I messaged anybody that I could find, whether it was a cold DM or sending them an @tweet that said that they worked for the New York Times. The only person who answered me was a cartoonist. And he ended up doing a really cool political cartoon on the strike. And that turned out to be the only coverage that the New York Times gave the strike. They later did a piece on why they weren't covering the strike, claiming that they couldn't get adequate information, but they never reached out to us to ask for people to interview. And I was in a position at the time that I would have known. So the New York Times was definitely lying about it. But because we pitched directly to this cartoonist, they have a weekly cartoon column. And they were able to create a cartoon, the first panel of which was a television that was turned off with a fist going through it with a sign that said there's a prison strike going on. And the caption to that first one was, "This is the only way that you're going to find out about the prison strike." So I don't know to what extent, I don't even remember that cartoonist's name, and I don't have a copy of the cartoon anymore, which I really should find. But I think he understood and had frustration over his outlet's unwillingness to cover the issue, and he got it covered in the way that he could. But I don't think that would have happened if we hadn't been aggressively randomly tweeting at people. Now, you don't want your account to only do that, because then people are going to think that you're a troll, or, you know, they're just going to ignore you. You want to make sure that your account has that good following to follower ratio, right? So like, she's following more people than follow her, but she's got the blue check mark and she's got 4,000 followers. So once you have over a couple thousand followers, I think whether this ratio is a little bit more skewed to people that you're following to followers becomes less of a big deal. Like I said, on my personal account, I really should go through and unfollow about 3,000 people and put some of those people on lists in order to have my personal account look more serious. But I'm not trying to like do anything with my personal account. So to me, it doesn't matter. But I do try to be really, really careful. Like when we started this, PAPS had a 3-to-1 followers to followed ratio. I've just been following a lot of news media in Ohio in the hopes that they would follow us back. And I kind of messed up our numbers a little bit, but they're still good. More questions, please, please, please.
This is just amazing information. Thank
Yeah.
you so much.
Agreed. This is so useful. Thank you.
Oh, may I make just one more comment?
Yeah.
Let's say that you put out a press release. Now, this is the wrong way to do it. People put out a press release and they include a link to their press release. A lot of people will no longer click on links, right? This is your friendly reminder that Barrett Brown went to prison for retweeting a link that he claims he never opened. So in light of just the fact that if you click on a link, it could have malware, and also in light of the fact that people are going to be a little disconcerted about retweeting a link that they can't see. And here's what I mean by they can't see. She's linking to a tweet here, but because it's from a news item, you're seeing a preview of this tweet, right? So if I retweet this tweet without following the link, I know that it's a news article. And I certainly retweet articles that I don't actually open or read. But if you're trying to get people to read your press release and you have it as a link to a website, people are going to have to click on it and follow it in order to read it. What you need to do instead is turn your press release into a picture and upload that picture. Let me see if I have any press releases.
Like a PDF?
You can do it as, I don't think Twitter will allow you to attach a PDF. I think it needs to be either a JPEG or a PNG, I believe.
Gotcha.
But you want it to be an image. Now, why is that relevant? During the 2018 hurricane, right? So Hurricane Harvey hit the coast of Texas, Louisiana, Carolinas, right? Ravaged that situation. And we had 7,000 incarcerated people who had to be evacuated and another 7,000 that should have been in warrant, right? So I think that's part of the reason in Texas we've responded better to this COVID crisis is that we're used to getting a hurricane crisis every other year. So we're sort of used to like mass crises in prisons. And I think in a way that in Ohio, you're just not. But we did a press release that had been, we emailed it out to our press contacts, copied and pasted it into the email, had it as an attachment, all of that good stuff. But then we came up with the brilliant idea of taking that PDF and turning it into a picture, and we tweeted it out. And something weird happened. We got 1,100 retweets on a tweet of a press release, which I'll be honest with you, shouldn't have happened, right? We would have been happy with 100. I ended up getting a phone call from the staffer of a U.S. House rep in Louisiana asking me what he thought that his office should be doing in order to make sure that the Federal Bureau of Prisons was doing what they needed to do in response to the hurricane. And I was like, how did you even see our press release? And he was like, I don't know. It came across my Twitter feed. I clicked on the picture. I liked what you had to say. I decided to call you.
Wow.
I am guaranteeing you that would have never happened if it had been a link. Because enough people wouldn't have bothered to click the link. Enough people wouldn't have. It's very possible that he wouldn't have even opened it if it had been a link. But because it was a picture, he was willing to read it. And because, we put all the contact information on there and everything, it made it easy. He was just like, I'll call this person.
Whew.
So these are small things, right? Like how hard is it to take a PDF and by all means post that press release on your website? But it's not that hard to also turn it into a JPEG or a PNG and embed it into a tweet to make sure that it previews.
What was the tweet that went with the press release?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't even remember. I mean, I think it was just the headline of the press release. But part of the reason I think it went viral is that we were doing coverage before the news was. And so people were actively searching for that information because we ended up getting a lot of tweets and a lot of followers following that. And that's something else that I think that people don't understand about getting news coverage. When you send a press release to an editor, the editor doesn't care about the content. They care about how many views is that content going to generate for them if they run a story. So what we found during the hurricane was individual reporters were interested in covering how the hurricane was impacting incarcerated people. But I'm thinking like and I don't want to drop names, but there was one news outlet where it was really clear that the editor did not want to run the story. But we managed to persuade a journalist to run one because we put it on a silver platter and made it really easy. Well, and the journalist was already on board, right? Like they were already following us, but they basically said to the editor, like, look, I have the information. I can just do this quick story. Can I run it? The story got 1 million views in 3 days. And so the journalist came back to us and said, hey, I have good news, bad news. My editor still doesn't like prison stories and basically thinks lock them up and throw away the key. But we ran a story on Friday, and by Monday, it had over 1 million views. So my editor is more interested in doing these, like looking at the individual lives of incarcerated people impact to Hurricane Harvey, because the editor is at least realizing that those stories are getting reads.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that, you know, when Paige does you the solid of giving you really great coverage, right? And including stories of people who are incarcerated and does a really good piece, then you need to do your part afterwards in order to make sure that their analytics on that particular story are through the roof. And you're not going to be able to know that information, but the journalists themselves will. Right? So like part of the reason that I developed that relationship with the LA Times is because when that strike story finally hit, it got 1.3 million views on their digital format, right? They put it out digitally Friday morning, and then it was physically printed on their newspaper that Monday. And it already had, I think it was 1.5 million views before it even hit the newsstands. So that's when they said, okay, you know, we want to be able to do more of this kind of coverage. I mean, and to be fair, I think that in Javid's case, he would have done the coverage anyway, but we made it easier for them to be able to do it in a way that was sympathetic to us. So like one thing that I noticed recently was that there was an NPR story about Marion that was basically an ODRC press release that was changed around a little bit.
Yeah.
They had nothing that was critical or humanizing. And we've been trying to figure out, okay, how can we get a hold of those reporters to say, hi, I noticed you ran this story and our voice isn't in it. What can we do to provide you an alternative? So at this point, I'm not really talking about Twitter anymore, but there are a couple of more just like how to get news coverage warnings that I want to give you. The news tends to think in terms of giving both sides of the story. And we once made a mistake. So we've made lots of them, but let me tell you a specific example. So during Hurricane Harvey, we got a request for media coverage from a San Antonio Fox News station. And my initial reaction was like, Fox News, I've been burned by Fox a lot. I'm not giving you the interview. And this reporter came back and said, no, we're a local news affiliate. Lots of people in San Antonio are formerly incarcerated or have a family member who's locked up. We're really going to give you sympathetic coverage. So I do my makeup, I go into the news station, right, to get recorded, give 20 minutes of recording. So this took a long time on my end. But as I had been talking to her on the phone, this is where the mistake came in. I happened to mention that this correctional officer union had also come out saying that they were concerned with prison conditions because it's their workplace.
Oh.
So here's what ended up happening. She went and found their information, and then this 3-minute piece ended up all being about the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's story versus the Correctional Officers Union story. They ran 15 seconds out of a concerned mom. My interview got completely cut, and they claimed it was something like, if you want to listen to an activist perspective, go to our website for that full interview. And they never even made that full interview available. If I had just not said Correctional Officers Union, if those words had never come out of my mouth, then it's a very real possibility that the two sides of the story would have been our side and the state side versus the state versus the union, because at the end of the day, their disagreements are really pretty low. So some reporters are just going to cover the state side because that's what's easiest. The prison beat isn't their thing. They don't have the resources. Maybe they managed to get a hold of the union, and those are the two sides. We want to make sure that when they cover this, it's the state side and the incarcerated people's voices, because that's going to push the story in the way that we want it to. And the only way to do that is to build relationships with those individual news people. And that means that, you know, if they message you and say, hey, I've been able to pitch this story, I need 3 people who are incarcerated who, whatever, are Black Muslims, observing Ramadan during COVID-19 in ODRC, then that might take you 2 hours of messaging every single ally that you have in order to find the 3 Black Muslim women, you know, observing Ramadan that they want for their story. And sometimes that's frustrating, but when you're able to put it on that silver platter for them, then you build a relationship, and the next time that they want coverage, they're going to come to you. And that's the part that's important. You want to make sure that you're building those long-lasting relationships with those reporters so that you can continue to get the kind of coverage that we need for our loved ones or the people that we're advocating for. We've got 9 more minutes. More questions?
This was so helpful. I feel like I've just been like Twitter baptized.
No, in order for that to happen, you have to get like, I think 100 cats on your timeline out of nowhere, or you need to get like random people to start screaming at you. Oh, that's an important thing to talk about. We haven't talked about trolls yet. People are going to troll you. They might troll your organization. They might troll you on your personal. How you deal with that and the level of professionalism that you want to deal with them on that is up to you, okay? One way to generate a lot of Twitter followers is to constantly be getting into drama, because then you've got these really long conversations that are going across Twitter timelines. So that's an avenue, right? Is to basically go and feed the trolls, and then you're going to spend a lot of time screaming with people. I don't recommend that on your organization page, but it can be a way to pick up a lot of followers and a lot of influence on your personal. You know, and different people's mileages vary on that. I tend to get trolled very rarely because I usually don't answer trolls, and when I do, I answer them in very funny ways, and I don't answer them in a way that's mean or spiteful. So I don't play into their strong hand of insulting them, and that usually shuts the trolls down. But it is important to sort of be careful with how you're interacting with really big accounts. So like Piper Kerman retweeted my personal account yesterday. She's the author of Orange is the New Black. That was kind of like a personal high in my Twitter life, right? Was getting retweeted by her. But, and to a certain extent, I think it was a little easier because she used to teach writing at Marion Correctional, and she had been quote tweeting this doctor, epidemiologist, that was talking about the numbers, and I said something about like, you know, this isn't the whole picture, blah, blah, blah. And I responded to both of them, and Piper happened to, I guess, like my response, and she retweeted me. Those are nice. You don't want to just be going after those big accounts though, because the likelihood that one of those big accounts is going to retweet you is really pretty rare. Most of them are generating their own content because they want to be, you know, on brand. But every once in a while, replying to a big account, especially if you're one of the first people to reply, can drive you followers. But you don't want that to be the only thing that your account is doing. Now, the analytics on that have changed. So back in the day when I first started on Twitter, there was just the tweets column. There was not this tweets and replies column. And I really hate the tweets and replies. I just want to see all tweets, but not all tweets will come across my feed. So the thing is, if you send a tweet and it's only to her, right? And then she replies to you, that conversation is not going to come across as many people's feed because it won't show up as an original Twitter conversation. It'll be a tweets and replies conversation. So you do want to be careful. But, you know, when you have a tweet like this and you see that it has a whole bunch of replies, one of the reasons why it's good to be looking at that latest views of Twitter is that if you can be one of the first people to reply to a tweet, then when people click on it to see the whole conversation, your reply will be the first one, and you're likely to get likes or retweets off a reply. Or people might, think that you're adding something interesting to the conversation and be like, oh, let me go look at this person's bio.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So definitely, if she has this as her pinned tweet and she only has 4 responses and she's replying to the people who are responding to her, even though this person has 10 followers, they're following 10 people and they have 1 follower, right? So this Twitter account is basically a complete newbie. I mean, they do have a bio and they have an icon picture, so good on them on that. But this does not look like a serious account. Also, because of all these numbers, don't do that. Like if you put Kit Kat and it gives you like a random string of numbers, keep changing your until it's something useful on your personal, because nobody's going to take this account seriously just on the basis of the name. But she responded to it. So my question is, if Epic were the ones that helped in the coverage of this, what I should be seeing is that Epic is the first tweet response on this account, and that y'all would be aggressively tweeting out this news article, which once again, you can do by scheduling it on TweetDeck. Oh, tweet delete is another thing that can sometimes be useful. On your personal account, especially, if you're worried about your job, you can set it so that it will delete tweets that are older than a certain date. So what I was trying to do was to take an old Twitter account and change it into a new one. And I just deleted all of the tweets so that I would have then a brand new platform to kind of show you through how to do it. Some people like to just set tweet delete to go back through and delete their personal Twitter every once in a while. It's not going to mess with your analytics. So here's the thing that I mean with the analytics. The other way that you can, so like a couple of things that you can tell about an account. The reason why I wanted to change this account and restart it versus just making a new one is this account joined in September of 2012. So by changing the of this account and then starting over, even if I only have 21 followers, this account is going to look more serious than an account that I just made yesterday.
Right.
But going through and deleting your old tweets on a personal account, like let's say that you are a new organizer and previously your Twitter has all been about like bong hits and Cheetos and like stuff that's inappropriate, you might want to go to tweet delete and just delete all your tweets or anything older than 1 week.
Do you know if there's something like this for Facebook?
Oh, please don't ask me any Facebook questions. Before this COVID-19 crisis, I hadn't logged into Facebook for 6 months.
Try a year and a half for me, and I have a mixed emotions about it. Yeah,
it's not mixed. I mean, look, I met all of you wonderful people at Epic through Facebook, so I'm happy for that. No, I've been able to do some good things on Facebook, but this reminds me of something. When you're thinking about Twitter, please understand that Twitter is basically a professional social media platform.
Right.
A journalist who's looking for a story and is trying to push a story is going to be on Twitter. Facebook is for the soccer moms of the world who want to post their baby pictures or whatever it is, right? So one of the things that you need to understand is each social media platform is different. Some people get lazy and they're like, oh, I have an Instagram post. I'm just going to have it also post to Facebook and also post to Twitter. No, because Instagram is primarily about sharing pictures. Twitter is primarily about trolling. No, I'm joking. No, not really. Twitter is primarily about sharing articles and pictures and short messages. And then Facebook is about very long rants. So when you're using a Twitter account, or when you say that you want to build your Twitter presence, you better have a really good idea of why it is that you're trying to build your Twitter presence. Are you going to recruit a bunch of organizers on Twitter? Probably not.
No.
I mean, I have met some folks on Twitter, right? By kind of seeing that they were interacting with my personal, or seeing that they were tweeting about prison issues, followed them, started talking to them a little bit on DMs. But mostly Twitter, I mean, first of all, I just don't think that you necessarily build organizers on social media, period, right? Somebody was saying, like, I'm not really sure that social media is even that useful. Well, useful for what? If you're trying to turn up 200 people at your rally and you think that you're going to do it through a Facebook event, have another thought. That's not how you're going to get people to turn up. Having a Facebook event is one part of that campaign, but it's not the end all be all. So Twitter is good for leveraging media, at least in my experience. But Facebook is good for being able to contact people to put the media in touch with them, right? So on the PAPS Ohio page, which I only started very recently, right, has 50 followers. Or I'm sorry, you don't call them followers on Facebook, 50 members of the group. And I just put out a note saying, hey, is there anybody with a loved one at Marion who wants to also talk to a journalist, right? I'd already given an interview, but she wanted another person to interview. Someone answered me within 3 minutes saying, yes, I'll speak to a journalist. And it's somebody that I don't know, and her loved one is in a completely different dorm in a different side of the unit. That was helpful in terms of showing the journalist, hey, I can get you a wide variety of voices.
Right.
So Facebook was helpful for that. Facebook, however, there's a lot of bullshit in terms of just because somebody posts something saying that something happened at a prison doesn't mean that something actually happened at a prison. Sometimes people make stuff up.
Right.
I mean, and I'm not saying that people don't lie on Twitter, but I think that on Twitter, it's maybe a little harder to pass those lies off. So you want to be good at leveraging the back and forth, right? So if you're seeing a lot of news stories on Facebook that for whatever reason are not getting shared on Twitter, you don't necessarily need the news alert. You can take those news items and take them off your Facebook page and also post them to Twitter. But the way that you post them to Twitter is different. So there are platforms out there. There's, like secondary apps that will take your tweets and automatically post them to Facebook, or will take your Facebook posts and automatically post them to Twitter. I think you can go from Twitter to Facebook like that a little bit better than you can go from Facebook to Twitter. And it has to do with the character limit. Because if you post something from Facebook to Twitter, it's going to read the first however many characters and then cut off and give a Facebook link. People are on Twitter because they don't like Facebook.
Right.
So if you're trying to send, like, if you have a video that's in your Facebook group, you need to put that stuff on YouTube and then tweet out the link. Because otherwise, people are not going to follow your link to Facebook. And if they see that your Twitter account is constantly just linking to Facebook, then they're going to unfollow you. Because, then I'll just join your group on Facebook if I'm a Facebook person. I'll just ignore you if I'm a Twitter person who hates Facebook.
Makes sense.
This has been super helpful. I'm probably going to sign off soon because I got to eat something before my 8 o'clock call.
Okay. Well, good on you for scheduling an 8 o'clock call. That's
Yeah.
I didn't schedule it. Trust and believe.
Yeah, same.
I don't wanna-
Okay, yes, this was great.
I can leave it
I'm glad
running.
we had the
though.
recording.
Yeah, and I was gonna say if there's any other questions, I can leave it running though. I just didn't want to get up without and have somebody ask me a question or something. And I can send out the recording to you, Azura, and then if anybody else wants to get it, just drop your email in the chat, and I will definitely send that to you.
Awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yes.
I feel, yes, blessed.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I didn't check the chat while this was going on, but I liked, oh wow, there was a lot of stuff on the chat. I like that people are sharing their Twitter accounts because that's important too. And on Fridays, people tend to do this thing called Friday Follow, which is hashtag FF sometimes or Friday Follow. But it's basically like, hey, if you follow my account and you like what we have to say, then these are the accounts that you should be following too. And that's a good way to kind of build coalition. And you don't necessarily have to do a Friday Follow on a Friday. But it's good to kind of know, so ours are our I Heart Paps, and then I just made one that I think was Ohio Paps. So by all means, like one of the things that we should be doing is all following each other. Because look, in terms of getting followers, your first 100 are by far the hardest. Once you have 100 followers, then like from 100 to 1,000 is the next step. And that can be a little tough. And then once you have 1,000, then your account is established and you're sort of good to go. But it's getting, that first 10, that first 100, and then the first 1,000. And, what I was trying to say about tweet delete earlier, I'm sorry, I interrupted myself. It's a weird superpower, is that you want to also be tracking how many tweets your account has. That's another indication of whether an account is serious, is if they've tweeted more than 10,000 times. There was even an SNL skit about this woman who like has her 10,000 tweet and then this party happens. And I remember like I got my 10,000th tweet, and I think you just get like a balloon icon or something that shows up on Twitter. When you go through and tweet delete, it doesn't take away from your number of tweets. But that is something that people look at when they're trying to figure out whether to follow you. Like if you have, like I'm just saying, if somebody follows me and their bio looks great, but they have 0 tweets, I'm not following them back. Because why would I mess up my ratio when they're not going to provide any content for me to retweet or read? That doesn't make any sense. But I've been seeing a lot of, activisty looking accounts who have the right bio, have the right hashtags in their profile, have the right names, but they're just not providing content.
Ooh. All right. Should I close down the recording or?
I just had one question. If you can specify, earlier when you were talking about links, don't post links, use photos. Do you have an example of what you were talking about?
I was specifically meaning in relation to press releases and links that do not preview. So it is totally fine to tweet a link if that link is going to have a preview. It is not okay if you're talking about your press release. So Epic and PAPS just did a joint letter, an open letter to ODRC. And I hope it's okay for me to say this, Gina, but I kind of drove her nuts because I was saying that our list of demands needed to be a JPEG. And the reason why I wanted the list of demands to be a JPEG is because I wanted to be able to do what I'm about to do, which is be able to tweet that out. Right? So, you had sent that to me. Where is it? Right? There's this demands PNG. And the idea is, and I'm not actually going to send this tweet out because this is, once again, an account that I'm still building. But, you see that there are these demands, right? And they were given from PAPS and the LEAP group and Epic. And this is an older version because it's the wrong logo. But it's saying like, these are the demands that we want ODRC to do in relation to standardization and medical transparency in food. I am going to get a lot more mileage tweeting this out as an image than I would sending out a web link on the press release. And I'm going to get a lot more mileage if I have just this one picture versus if I have pictures of all 3 pages of the press release. And that has to do with how an image, if it's one picture, will display on Twitter versus 2 or versus 4. Because how big the preview is gets smaller depending on how many pictures you have. So if I want people to retweet this, then I need to make sure that the way that I'm doing it is, okay, I'm going to send out a tweet and I'm going to embed this image, right, of demands. And when I embed it as an image, people are going to see this, right? So we call on Ohio, DRC Ohio, I think is their at, to make the following changes to stop the spread of COVID-19 behind bars, and then tweet that out. I'm going to go ahead and head out because I'm getting a call from my husband, but it's been good seeing you guys.
Thank
But
you.
does this make sense? Y'all,
Thank you. Thank you.
gender neutral. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.